Hello, everyone. Thank you so much for joining the webinar today on shaping the fund for responding to loss and damage, FRLD. I'm not sure whether all the participants are in. I think I can see all the participants are in right now. And we have also started the recording for this session. So just to be aware and inform all the participants that this session will be recorded throughout from the start to the end. And we think that if you are here in this session, we take it that you accept that you are being recorded as part of this session. So thanks again for joining this session. And just to start with the formal introduction of the panelists, and just before that, also wanted to acknowledge that this session on Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage is being co-organized by a couple of organizations, namely Indonesia Research Institute for Decarbonization, IRID, and IRID is in collaboration doing this webinar with organizations like Germanwatch, the Institute of Climate and Sustainable Cities, ICSC, based out of Philippines, LAYA-INECC network, which is Indian Network for Ethics and Climate Change, Greenovation Hub, China, and SLYCAN Trust, Sri Lanka. So thank you again once for joining this session. The purpose of this session is to ensure that we talk throughout the session on the practical realities of operationalizing the fund for responding to loss and damage on road to COP30, and to share knowledge in a way that it can imbibe a cross-actor learning and facilitate the operationalization of fund in an active, fair, and fast manner. So having said that, I'll briefly take you through the speakers that we have right now online with us. And to start with, I'll just introduce you Miss Claire Miranda. Claire is with us. Hi, Claire. Thanks for joining. Claire works with the Asian People Movements on Debt and Development and is a FRLD observer from developing countries. Claire has been an advocate on various issues related to climate justice. Claire is based out of Philippines and is keenly and very closely following issues related to climate negotiations, especially last year, issues related to climate finance, and now issues related to loss and damage. And Claire comes from a very strong background of grassroots level organizations leading this work on loss and damage and what are the demands of vulnerable communities. So welcome again, Claire. Along with Claire, we have our very well-known friend, Breta Iris. Breta works with Germanwatch and is also serving as a member of board for Adaptation Fund. Apart from being a member of Adaptation Fund board, she's also part of the project and program review committee of the Adaptation Fund. Breta, by education, is an economist, and she specializes in public policy with a focus on agriculture sector. And I do not need to underline so much. I think we all know, Breta, you very much, and your role in shaping the narrative of climate finance and climate negotiations, especially last year on NCQG negotiations, and the nitty-gritties of how what has been proposed, and the real reasons of a lot of proposals that were on table were clear evidence of the fact that your expertise in finance and your outlook towards global southern realities can guide us towards making the fund for loss and damage more active and more inclined towards bridging it with realities of vulnerable communities in global south. So welcome both of you. We have a couple of other panelists, one from developing countries and another from developed countries. Both are represented on the fund for as a board member for Fund for Loss and Damage. We are awaiting their joining us on this session, but meanwhile, what we can do, we can start the session, and I can pass on the baton and floor to Claire to initiate the first session to take us through the current status of Fund for Responding for Loss and Damage. Claire, over to you.
Yes, thank you very much. I hope you can see my screen and you can hear me.
Yeah, we can see it.
Okay, thank you. So again, thank you for inviting me to to this very important webinar, I'd just like to start by sharing that currently the Philippines is being ravaged by three storms. We have one tropical storm, one typhoon, and one tropical depression coming in. They're all in the area of responsibility of our country, and each of them are bringing torrential rains that are now drowning our cities and provinces. We are usually hit by an average of 20 typhoons per year, but we have never experienced such situation right now where three storms all at once are bringing this amount of nonstop rain for the past 7 days. And we have yet to see the real extent of the losses and damages these bring to the country. And I'm sharing this because I think this webinar is very timely because many of us here in the participants, I see that we find this um, phenomenon quite familiar already. It's also happening in your respective communities, in your countries. This has become the new normal for us in the Global South. And I'd like to believe that our resilience is not only being tested, but it is also being abused because when the time comes when we needed support to recover and rebuild, we're usually left alone to fend for ourselves and move on. So I'm sorry for that quite depressing introduction, but I believe we need to start with that reminder that that's the new reality for many of us in the Global South. So I'd just like to start by saying that so this is about this presentation is about the status of the FRLD. We know that the loss and damage agenda has long faced political resistance under the UNFCCC, with governments slow to act despite growing evidence of climate impacts. So the timeline on the right shows us that as early as 1991, loss and damage finance is already being raised in the climate negotiations, but it was only after the Typhoon Haiyan hit the Philippines did government started talking about loss and damage more seriously. And slowly, loss and damage was included in the negotiating text. Mechanisms to further study and understand the extent of losses and damages were established. But when it comes to means of implementation or when the topic of financing comes up, that is where the strong resistance from developed countries would come up. And in 2022 at COP27, despite the initial exclusion of loss and damage from the agenda, the sustained pressure from civil society, CSOs, I remember we've been doing daily actions there calling for loss and damage fund at that time, plus the strong unity from negotiators from G77 and China. They pushed the negotiations forward to have the finance for loss and damage. And the COP presidency also facilitated consensus among parties, and it laid the groundwork for what is now the fund for responding to loss and damage. It was a hard-won victory, but progress remains very slow. A year later in Dubai, pledges from both developed and developing countries were announced, which was seen as a signal for progress and was celebrated by many developed country governments. They claim that they have committed support to vulnerable nations, but really it wasn't that impressive because only 788 million worth of pledges, with only less than half delivered so far. So if you can see the figures there on the right, 788 are the pledges, but what's in the fund right now, what is actually delivered is around 367 million only. So while some countries, including the US, Germany, they have already delivered their full pledges, others like the UK, they committed to pay in installments. But also, even if the US, the Germany, and others have paid in full their pledges, it remains unclear whether these initial pledges are or represent their total contribution or if additional contributions will be expected from them. And looking at the numbers I've mentioned, the 367 million there is just peanuts compared to the scale of the crisis that we are facing. So if you look at the conservative estimates, to cover for the annual economic cost of loss and damage in developing countries by 2030, we should have at least 400 to 800 billion by 2030. And if we want to truly reflect the actual scale of need, including the non-economic losses, the systemic disruptions, and climate risks, the funding for loss and damage should reach at least 1 trillion per year. Another issue that came up when the FRLD was established was the host. Currently, the FRLD board decided to have the Philippines as its host country. So, host country is the Philippines. It is mandated to provide the legal identity of the fund. So, this will allow the fund to sign legal agreements and for the board members to be granted with privileges and immunities like any other international institution. This doesn't mean that the Philippines will have an advantage or influence the decisions around the direction of the fund. The board of the FRLD has that mandate. As per the host of the secretariat, this is where the resistance from the civil society in developing countries came into picture again. So the US, during the transitional committee, when the fund is being created or developed, the US proposed that the World Bank will be the host of the fund, arguing that in order to speed things up, for the FRLD, it should be under a well-established institution, the World Bank, rather than building the fund from scratch. So developing countries were confused at that time because based on the COP mandate or the decision from the COP, the fund will definitely need to create its own governing instrument, its own rules of procedure, and it aims to have an independent board and an independent secretariat, meaning it will definitely start from scratch to ensure that it serves its mandate. So this is where the linkage between the work of the CSOs and developing country transitional committee members at that time came into play. So we, the CSOs, launched the World Bank Out of Loss and Damage Finance campaign. We made noise online and in World Bank offices, and we have lobbied hard with the developing country TC members at that time to block the US proposal. We didn't win entirely because the World Bank is the host of the FRLD Secretariat, but the developing country TC members made sure that there were strict conditions for the World Bank to comply with. So current decision is the World Bank hosts the Secretariat, but the FRLD Secretariat will maintain its independence and will only serve the board of the FRLD and not the World Bank. And this hosting of the World Bank is at the interim period, meaning the board can still decide to change the hosting arrangement after 4 years. And then recently, the board has decided to launch its startup phase called the Barbados Implementation Modalities or BIM. So the BIM, which because there are many items where the board didn't have consensus, it remains like bare bones of how the fund will operate during its initial period. This means that the board will be busy in the succeeding months adding flesh and meat to its bare bones. But so far, they have decided to allocate 250 million for the years 2025 to 2026 and allow support for projects, for each project or activities with a budget of 5 to 20 million only for each activity and program. And they also decided to secure 50% floor of the 250 million for LDCs and SIDs. So in the BIM, the board also decided to add this preambular text on the right, which we are happy to see because these are our language. You can see these in the various statements and materials of CSOs that there should be new, additional, predictable, and adequate resources. But these are just adjectives and nothing really concrete or even a phrase to signal that the fund will grow according to the scale of need. So that's another concern that we share with developing country board members because some are saying that the FRLD will be just another small fund that eventually will be irrelevant. When for us, the FRLD is the fund for many communities to claim their reparations. And then recently in the in the last board meeting in Cebu, the issue on access um, came up. So many of us, together with developing country board members, we envision that the FRLD is the fund that will quickly disburse money. It will allow direct access for all those needing support in the event of losses and damage. And as we have lived experiences of what a post-disaster or post-calamity looks like, and that this fund was created based on the notion that countries with the least responsibility to the climate crisis are left to face the impacts on their own. We believe that the FRLD will be the fund to address the barriers and just outright provide what is needed. We thought that it's easy, it should be easy, it should be accessible, or these features will differentiate the FRLD from the rest of the climate fund. And in Cebu, at BSIC, when the board started discussing access, there was strong pushback from developed countries in making sure that the FRLD is accessible um, only to a select developing countries. They claim that this fund is not a fund for everyone. And they wanted to change some language from all developing countries eligible to access to only particular vulnerable countries. For me, it was really absurd because the same debate transpired when they're still developing the governing instrument of the fund. And it was agreed also in COP that all developing countries are eligible to access the fund. Developed country board members also pushed for several eligibility criteria that countries need to comply with. And many of them are quite hard to measure or evaluate in order for them to access the fund. So again, quite absurd in my opinion. And still under the issue on access, the proposed direct budget support was somehow designed to follow the World Bank's policy. Because the World Bank, as mentioned earlier, although they host the Secretariat, they still vaguely play a role in the fund. When the Secretariat drafted the proposed eligibility criteria, they indicated that only member countries of the World Bank can access. So if only member countries of the World Bank can access, this automatically limits almost 90 plus developing countries. And because of this development at the last board meeting, the developing countries were united again in pushing back with Ambassador Adao, one of the strong voices there. They rejected this eligibility list based on the World Bank member countries, and they also pushed for direct budget support to national public entities of all developing countries. So in terms of access, we have yet to see in the coming months. The board failed to come into a consensus on indecisions related to access at the last board meeting. So we have yet to see how this debate unfurls. But we as CSOs, we reminded the board that in all these discussions, all these debates about um, policies. Wait, I'm not sure if I can still be heard. Okay. Um, so I'm not. We CSOs, we reminded the board that all these discussions will be pointless if the fund never gets adequately resourced. So it's like the fund is setting all these eligibility requirements for very little money. So the call for urgent resource mobilization strategy, one that reflects the scale of need, is still very important. And with that, I will end my presentation for now because I was asked that there will be a break in between before we go to shaping of the FRL. But I'm here for questions if there are any questions.
Well, thank you so much, Claire. I think super clear in terms of the process, in terms of the challenges that collectively as civil society have witnessed so far in getting an achievement of, at least shaping the fund for responding to loss and damage. And, also taking us through the gaps in terms of, what is actually needed. The fund on loss and damage should actually respond to the need of billions and trillions of dollars, whereas only a marginal amount of 700 million, something around 700 million is being earmarked, and even half of that is only delivered. So it tells us a real, grim picture of, how the world collectively is responding to loss and damage. Plus, you gave us really good insight into issues related to access, the eligibility conditions for accessing the funds, and so many other things related to the, tug of war between developed and developing countries board members. So thank you again, Claire, for that. And you're very correct. I think this gap was kept intentional so that we could go through the overall structure of the fund for loss and damage, the status of the fund, and then, come in a very sequenced manner on an array of questions. So I'll again start with you. And before I do that, I just want to remind all the participants that if you have any burning questions, please feel free to write in the Q&A section. And folks and panelists would be, happy to answer based on their area of expertise. So, you need not wait or raise your hand, but please, put your question in the Q&A section. So yeah, thanks for that. And thank you again. And I think we are still awaiting a couple of other panelists to wait, but I think with Claire and with Bretta, both of you being there, I'll start the formal opening of the panel discussion and the session. Claire, again, I mean, you mentioned the status so far as of now. Could you also tell us, I mean, based on your experience, I mean, you've worked on the technical evolution of the NCQG in last many years. You've seen the climate politics. You've seen the discourse of civil society, how campaigns are being shaped up, and how the campaigns and the politics interact with each other. So, based on your experience on road to COP30, where do you see the key milestones for operationalizing the fund for loss and damage? It is operationalized, but not nonetheless, it's not operationalized to the needs of the vulnerable community or the needs of the global south. But to get our demands accepted, what is it that we need that the fund for loss and damage should make sure that in the next few months we should watch out in terms of key milestone and narratives that we should, as civil society members, help shape to achieve our demands on road to that. So yeah, any thoughts
Okay.
on?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I think that's a very important question because the fund is at its beginning stage, and as mentioned earlier, it's still bare bones. There's no meat yet in there has no been policy decided yet. There's still the board members are still not arriving at any consensus on so many issues. But I guess the biggest milestone that we need to achieve before COP30, although very challenging milestone with the way things are happening, is the resource mobilization. That's because the amount, as mentioned, is not enough for to address the scale of need in terms of loss and damage. And um the board members, many I wish that Ambassador Ada will be here, but the board members from developing countries have been really pushing the secretariat to prepare already the resource mobilization strategy. While I understand that resource mobilization is strategy is for them to get to work and really ask contributor countries, those who are responsible for the climate crisis, to deliver their obligations. Well, that is the task of the resource mobilization strategy. I think a very important point also being raised in the board is um, the scale of need should also be set, because the fund for responding for loss and damage is not just a 700 million kind of fund. We know that billion or at least 1 trillion per year is already needed by 2030. So settling on a 700 million target is really alarming, because the needs of the global south are hundreds are in trillions already, and we have we are seeing everyday impacts getting worse and worse, and it's the new reality for the people and communities of the global south. And all these policies, all these debates that they're having at the board level will all be useless if the fund is, you know, at 700 million only. And considering that they have agreed that for this year, 2025, 2026, they agreed that 250 million will be disbursed for any kind of project or any kind of need for loss and damage. And if we look at the numbers again earlier, 360 is what they have right now in the fund. And then if they're going to allocate 250 million of that for this year alone, 2025 to 2026, that means only a little less than 100 million will be left after 2026. So I don't know if we are okay with that. That in itself is alarming, and we don't see any signal of commitment also from other developed countries, because we've seen in the board discussion, then when it comes to resource mobilization strategy, many of the developed countries are quite silent in the discussions. They're more keen to discussing the eligibility criteria. They're more keen into discussing who gets to access. The priority should be given to the most vulnerable communities, and this is not a fund for all. That's what we've been hearing from them.
Thank you so much, Claire. And I can see Simon is also there with us, one of our esteemed panelists. Thank you so much for joining, Simon. Just to give you a brief update, and for the participants, just to give you a brief introduction, we've already introduced two of our panelists, Claire and Breta, and Simon is also with us. So thank you so much, Simon, for joining. For panelists, I think Mr. Simon Stuff serves as the Deputy Chief of Climate Finance Division at the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, BMZ, and is an Fund for Responding for Loss and Damage board member as well. Simon contributes to shaping the global climate finance policy, emphasizing the importance of direct access modality to enable subnational community level delivery. Simon holds a solid background in coordinating climate finance initiative in Pacific under the UNDP Pacific work, and he is the lead contributor to COP28 Aligned Pacific Policy Premier on Loss and Damage. So welcome, Simon. Thanks again for joining us as well. We were just, discussing the challenges and the status of Fund for Loss and Damage, and we will, be very keen to hear your thoughts on various issues related to what is the stance for developed countries in shaping and operationalizing the Fund for Loss and Damage. But before we do that, I'm just being informed by the background team to check with Claire. Claire, do you have any other presentation as well on shaping the Fund for Loss and Damage? Or you've completed your intervention?
I have another presentation, but it really highlights about the CSO, the role of the CSOs in shaping the fund.
Okay, so I think if you can, use that presentation for next 5 minutes, we have, excess 5 minutes now. You can use that, and then we can come to both Simon and Greta for reactions.
Right, I can do that. Thank you.
Thanks.
Okay, so this presentation focuses on the role of civil society and the role that they have played and continue to play in shaping the fund for responding to loss and damage. So even in the board or in various spaces, there's great recognition for the efforts of CSOs to make the establishment of the fund possible. And now we have repeatedly said that FRLD is not a gift. We have never envisioned it as charity or aid from the global north, but rather a realization of their obligation under the UNFCCC and Paris Agreement. It was won through decades of struggle, through CSOs and frontline communities, through our call for reparations and the demand to make polluters pay. So this framing laid the moral and political foundation of the fund and was key to moving beyond charity into obligations. And it's also because of this framing why we are expecting the board to start discussing the resource mobilization strategy and reflect in there the scale of need. And then since the fund is here, and it was because of CSOs, We want to make sure that the realities being discussed in developing climate policies and programs, they truly reflect what is happening on the ground. So our participation and representation in loss and damage processes, whether it be in the UNFCCC or in the FRLD spaces, our goal is to bring the experiences of people living and dying through climate disasters, not just looking at them as abstract statistics. We try to bring the urgency of lived experience into negotiation and meeting rooms and make the decision makers understand that loss and damage goes beyond just money. It's also about losing our identity, our homes, and our rights to live with dignity. And we make sure that the fund addresses these multi-layered and real impacts in our lives. And in the FRLD board processes, although the observer participation policy has yet to be decided, the co-chairs have added an agenda item in every board meeting, the CSO dialogue, where representatives of observers sit with the board and discuss issues and allow for questions and answers to take place between the CSOs and the board. And then part of our role is also to expose the global north's hypocrisy. We have heard the same excuse in the thought process, GCF and Adaptation Fund, that the reason why these funds are inadequately resourced is that there are budget constraints from developed countries and that there's no enough money. But we also know that billions are still poured into fossil fuel expansion. Billions um, are given to beef up military budgets, and CSOs are here to remind that providing support for climate finance in general, including FRLD, is an obligation under the UNFCCC, and failure to do so, as we have heard, the ICJ just affirmed last night, will have legal consequences. So CSOs are here in this process to call out the hypocrisy and demand um, those responsible to fulfill their obligations and go beyond just pledging, actually delivering based on their fair share and scale of need. We're also here, as mentioned earlier, to unmask the World Bank. There's strong resistance for giving the World Bank a role in the FRLD since the beginning. While the conditions are there, the CSOs continue to oppose the World Bank's involvement in the fund because it is an institution that is designed to earn profit from loans, limit access to those who they think deserve support, and its record on fossil fuel financing and conditional lending, things we all campaigned that the FRLD should move away from. These are still attached to the World Bank. So allowing the World Bank to have a role in the FRLD, it risks reinforcing unequal power dynamics and undermining justice that we hope the fund can partly deliver. We are also here demanding direct access. So it must be guaranteed for all developing countries without conditionalities. And then intermediaries, as we have seen in the GCF, they cause for processes to be slow and complicated. We also reiterate at every chance we get that the FRLD is not a bank. It shouldn't give out loans, that it will only worsen the debt situation of Global South countries. And also, very important, we continue to engage and work at this space to ensure that the fund governance structures uphold equity, transparency, and rights-based access. And for us to do so, transparency must be ensured. We continue to call out the lack of access to information, especially for the people and communities that this fund seeks to support. So the fund's existence is a win, but implementation is everything, and CSOs will remain a force to continue the engagement in the FRLD for justice, inclusion, and accountability. And we're here to remind those in the decision-making seats, the board, that the FRLD is not a bank, but a solidarity fund for the people of the Global South. And I think I can end my presentation with that and continue with the panel discussions.
Thank you so much, Claire. I think super presentations, both on putting the demand straight away from civil society perspective, and also for earlier presentation letting us know the status of fund for responding to loss and damage. So I think just to start and open up the discussion with all the panelists, I think we have now full house. We have a representative and board member from developed countries. Simon is there. We have Adao from developing countries, Timor-Leste. We have Breta with us, and of course, we have Claire. So I'll just start again, since we've just heard from Claire in terms of expectation for civil society, the issues around, how the fund should be structured, the need and access modalities, the gap between what is required and what is being delivered, the politics part of it, and really rising up to the opportunity of responding to loss and damage. I just wanted to give floor and initial reactions from first from developing countries perspective and then from developed countries perspective. So that's the sequence that we have agreed. So I'll just briefly introduce Mr. Mr. Adao, thank you very much for joining us. Mr. Adao is the Special Envoy and Ambassador for Climate Change Affairs from Timor-Leste. Mr. Adao has extensive experience on issues related to loss and damage and putting the loss and damage agenda on behalf of LDCs in the UNFCCC negotiations. He has not only, worked on issues related to loss and damage in UNFCCC, but also on issues related to Adaptation Fund Board. He has been representing LDCs on the Adaptation Fund Board, also on the Warsaw International Mechanism Executive Committee. And so you've ensured that the interest of least developed countries are central to the fund design. And thanks for doing that and advocating for country-specific vulnerabilities and needs. But our question to you is that, sir, given the challenges of operationalization of fund, the lengthy fight to achieve a fund, first of all, and then, really making it fit for purpose on road to COP30. Where do you see, and where do you see LDC's stance in terms of making it fit for purpose on road to COP30? So over to you, sir. Am I audible, Mr. Adao?
Thank you very much for your introduction. Sid, thank you very much. Are you hearing me?
Yes, I can hear you loud and clear.
Okay. In terms of your question, fit for purpose issues for LDCs, I think the fund must be fast, accessible, and country-owned, country-led, and country system. That's key. And it must be fundamentally different from other existing climate change funds like GF, DCF, Adaptation Fund, and so forth. So we are strongly advocating for direct budget support as the main access modality for LDCs and simplified rapid access triggered by soft triggers such as declaration of nation with regard to emergency. I think that's very critical point. So in terms of direct access through direct budget support must be central issues or key issues for LDCs to easily access to the fund. So it avoids the accreditation issues that entities in LDCs have faced for the DCF and other fund. So in terms of adaptation fund as well. So it strengthens long-term national capacity, ensures alignment of funding with national priorities, and enhances country ownership itself. And along with direct access through national direct access entities, these are much more efficient access modalities, reducing the administrative costs associated with the multilateral development banks. We are experiencing from the current fund arrangement for, let's say, climate change, and UN agencies, and allowing more resources to reach vulnerable communities. That's key for the LDCs. In terms of modalities for a rapid response in the case of extreme events or extreme weather events would be key, where an extreme weather event would trigger funds to be directly disbursed through direct budget support. So trigger itself must be soft indicators, such as declaration of national emergency that I just mentioned, rather than rely on the data that often isn't available in our countries, like loss and damage data and emergency data. It's very, very difficult for the LDCs. This approach would allow automatic disbursement of fund itself to the developing countries, especially the LDCs, to address the real needs that they are facing, without the needs for prior plans or proposals that will take some time, and also something related to climate rationale, loss and damage rationale will be very, very difficult for the LDCs. Critical for ensuring that the fund is inclusive and equitable, and that lack of preparedness does not hinder access. That's something that we need to think about. And also simplified access is another key element that we could consider, ensuring that we do not create the same barriers to entry that existing fund, other or the fund that we have already received, let's say from DCF and the adaptation fund and so on and so forth. So we do think that the functional equivalency should be defined, simplified, and also flexible, not become accreditation by other name. I think that's very, very important. So again, functional equivalence is key for the LDCs. This is particularly important for the LDCs, where we have seen accreditation to the DCF and adaptation fund present challenges for entities in LDCs, not necessarily because they don't meet the relevant standards, but because the burden of proof is too high for us to do so. I think this element will be the key to ensuring the fund, including the Barbados Implementation Modalities, can deliver at least 50% of this fund will be going to the least developed countries and small island developing states. Without this flexibility, LDCs among those countries most vulnerable to the impact of climate change, I think will be difficult to access the fund. The reality on the ground is, I think, no time for us to have a proposal development, and no resource for stringent access rules when our countries are hit by climate related disaster. When we need to ensure people survive in dignity, when we need to rebuild a basic infrastructure for them, while at the same time, of course, servicing debt and preparing for the next disasters. And I think this will, let's say, with no, will hit again with near certainty. I think that's the key for us. So again, direct budget support and the rapid disbursement issue needs to be established, need to be part of the shaping issues, so that the LDCs can access, directly to the fund. And at national level, we also need to establish our national condition with regard to focal points or authority that will be facilitating these access issues to submit funding request or proposal for getting support from this fund. So I think that's something that we could share with you with regard to your question. Back to you.
Thank you so much, sir. Thank you, Mr. Rao, for taking us through the realities of the ground and the stance that least developed countries are taking. I mean, you have taken us through all the positions that LDCs have taken for the fund for loss and damage, which includes avoiding unnecessary hassles related to accreditation, accessing the fund, and making sure that you have a demand put right up there for direct access to funds. I mean, when the loss and damage and when the climate extreme hits, it does not gives you times to put a proposal forward and start a formal process to access fund. So I think thanks for putting that across, that message. Very important, sir. I think having learned from you, and I think we have the time now to move to the next speaker. And I can see that the next question should be asked from the board member from developed countries, Simon. Thanks again for joining us for this discussion. And you've heard from presentation from civil society members, from Claire. You've also heard from Mr. Adao, your colleague and board member on FRLD. We just wanted to, check with you. I mean, from your perspective, from a developed country's perspective, we've known that there is a vast gap in terms of, what is actually required in terms of managing the loss and damage realities on ground, and what is being promised and then delivered. So there's a vast gap in that. You've also heard the realities from LDC's perspective. So from developed countries' perspective, what is it that we should expect in terms of overall political priorities and climate negotiation stances on road to COP30 that would make easier for us as civil society members to find a sweet spot between developed and developing countries' politics, ensuring that we have a fast, fair, and funded delivery of fund for loss and damage in the next couple of months. So over to you, Sam.
Yes, thank you very much, Nakul, and good morning, everybody. It's a pleasure for me to be here with you and also share perspectives from the German board seat to this very important process. And I think your webinar is coming at the right time. We're in the middle of discussing all these different aspects, which just has been mentioned by my dear board member colleague Adao, also by civil society. Thanks for keeping up the pressure on a fast operationalization of the fund. We do agree that this is needed. So basically, we are at a crucial moment regarding the FRLD. We had a milestone decision at the COP28 in Dubai when the fund was launched, and we had a very speedy start, including the initial pledges which had been made in Dubai, and the setting up of the fund with the institutional setup, with the selection of the host country, the selection of the executive director, and all these fundamental things you need that the fund is actually able to deliver. This has been done in the first 1.5 years, and that has been much quicker than, for example, as we have experienced with the GCF. We are now at a crucial moment because it is one thing to have a fundament for the fund, but the other thing is we do want the fund to deliver. And at least I can say that Germany, we are strongly committed to improving the support landscape for responding to loss and damage, including the fund, and we see that as a central pillar. And this is also a question of solidarity for us. I'm coming from a development ministry, so this solidarity aspect is has always been a central aspect of our development cooperation with countries in the global south. And so it is also for marginalized people and particularly vulnerable developing countries when it comes to dealing with losses and damages, climate-induced losses and damages. So the question is, what should the fund actually do? And this is, I come to that later, but this is also linked to the question how we mobilize resources to the fund. What we do want is to, and I just let me say that again, that the vast majority of the aspects mentioned by Adao I can subscribe to. We want a fast fund. We want it accessible. We want it to be different from other funds. We are open for direct budget support modalities. We discussed that at the last board meeting, and we have there are two things. So first of all, how do we want the fund look like at its final operational model, and how do we kick off the fund now with the initial kickoff phase under the Barbados Implementation Modality, the so-called BIM. So let me start with the first one. So at the end, we do want to build an innovative fund which is able to support most of the most vulnerable with responding to loss and damage. And this crucial for us is that it contains a bottom-up, country-led, and country-owned approach. So there must be inclusivity, that the needs and demands are articulated from the bottom towards the country systems. It's country-led. Countries are in the center of this approach, and it's country-owned. So it's not something a country know best what is good for their response to deal with loss and damage. And this is including then also building inclusive national response systems to bring together all the relevant stakeholders within a country. And strengthening resilience also in our perspective is beyond reconstructing. So reconstruction is often insufficiently addressing the underlying vulnerabilities that lead to loss and damages in the first place. So to put it in a nutshell, we want to tailor the delivered support to the needs of the most vulnerable communities in developing countries with the mentioned aspects. And of course, this all has to be coherent and in complementarity with the wider loss and damage landscape. We heard about the huge needs and the gap, which we do acknowledge, we do all acknowledge is there. And to be very honest, no matter how we capitalize this fund, this one fund can never cover all the needs in the world. So we also have to take into account that there's a support landscape which merits our attention. And so we don't want to wait and negotiate for the next couple of board meetings until we get to a final model of an operational fund. We do want the fund to deliver now. This is why we started the Barbados Implementation Modality at the, now it's already the pre-last meeting in Barbados, where we decided to put aside $250 million for the startup phase until the end of 26. So we are able to have a first set of fundings in a range between 5 and 20 million for each activity. And that should also be representative for the full scope of the fund. We are happy that as we already discussed in the transitional committee, to have a minimum allocation floor of 50% for SIDS and LDCs. So I think that's also important that that we put a focus on those who are most vulnerable and who are most in need to funding for responding to loss and damage. We do see the BIM as an instrument which is financed through grants, but let me also add to that: countries. It's a country-owned and country-led approach. So countries we give grants to the countries, but what countries then decide to do with the grants in terms of exploring engagement with private sector or other financial instruments, that's also part of the country-owned approach. But we are committed to finance through grants. And this is a learning phase. So what it's a pragmatic first step. We want to be the BIM seen as a testing and learning phase for the longer term policies of the fund. And so there's one more board meeting before the COP, which is B7. That will be in October in the Philippines. And ideal would be we should there be enable the fund to launch a first call for proposals to start the implementation. So the signal to the COP would then be, look, we built this fund in its first year, and now we are making it operational, and the fund is now in the position to start delivering. I mean, that's the call for proposals. We need to then receive the proposals, and until the money gets out, there will be that will be next year. But that would still be a strong and positive signal. I do understand, and not only understand, I share your impatience that at the end the final objective of the fund is not to have an institutional structure. The final objective is also not to have a nice startup phase. The final objective is that the fund and the funding reaches the most vulnerable. And we are, I can ensure that we are, all board members are working with full speed on that objective. And there's a couple of things to solve on the way to get there. This is the business of the ongoing board meetings. And let me mention also, since we talked about the resources, that this is linked to the resource mobilization strategy. Of course, we are committed to a long-term resource mobilization strategy. Germany has also given money to the fund when it was not even launched at the COP28 in Dubai. And let me say that in honest words, it's not a set phrase, but we're in a world where many developed countries, not speaking for Germany, but in general, we're experiencing order cuts. We have a changed role of the US. So funding for development and climate is more under pressure than it has been 10 years ago. So we need to know what the fund is doing. Developed countries need to know, to have a clear understanding of what the fund is doing, to be able to make a business case at their finance ministry, to be able to ask for the funding the fund needs. This so and this is why we need the strong the fast and quick operationalization of the fund to bring developed countries in a position to make that business case for their national budgets. Germany is committed to that, and not only the contribution to the FRLD, we were also hosting the GCF replenishment conference. When was it? One or already 2 years ago, maybe. Time is fast. We are on that process. Please keep the pressure on us. Remind us that it's not fast enough, and all the different aspects. That's the discussion we have also here in this webinar when it comes to the content and to the question how we do it. And this would then be my conclusion for Germany. It's not about, at least for Germany, I can say we are committed that we want to do it, and we're open to discuss with you how we do it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Simon. Thanks a lot for taking us through the perspective of developed countries. And, thanks for making some crucial points. I mean, you mentioned that there is a real attempt by almost all fund members and board members on making sure that the fund responds to the real needs. And you want the fund to be really innovative in a sense in which it can uphold the local aspects, the local need aspects, and it's governed by the national priorities. So I think we definitely found some resounding, words of hope from your conversation and from your interaction. Of course, not to ignore the fact that there are still, large gapping questions in terms of, how do we achieve that? The word innovation is I mean, to look at it, it is really, appealing, but then, drawing the contours of that innovative fund is really challenging, and especially at a time when the world is in various shapes of geopolitical conflicts, along with climate conflict. So it's a challenging situation, we understand, not only for developing countries but also for developed countries. But I think we can open up this discussion on a lot of things in terms of monitoring and evaluation, and making sure how do we ensure that transparency aspects of delivery for fund for loss and damage are respected. But before we do that, I'll hand over the baton to our last but not the least most important speaker, Britta. Britta, please guide us through, based on your experience from adaptation fund board member, on the challenges and opportunity and the lessons especially that we would want to use for fund for loss and damage to respond to the challenge of coming up to the realities of loss and damage. And this is especially true, you need to keep in mind, this is especially true when this fund is only delivering as a transition fund. The real fund is yet to be delivered. So with that transition fund realities and with the challenge of access, the legal aspects of this fund delivery, what are the pitfalls that we need to avoid straight away? Over to you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And I'll try also to add some of my experience on the GCF as well, because I think those two funds will have a lot to teach us. So I wanted to start by kind of building on something I've heard before, which is the need for speed and for the fund to really start delivering. And I want to say that I agree with the need for the fund to start delivering as soon as possible for vulnerable countries and communities. But coming from the perspective of someone that has had some experience with other funds structures, I think I would like to first start by saying that it is important to find a balance between speed of delivery and the need to build a very good and strong structure for the fund for responding to loss and damage. Because if you don't build the structure that will really deliver on all of those needs, you will spend the next 10 or 15 years trying to correct the mistakes you made at the beginning when you're setting up the fund. And we're seeing that with the adaptation fund, and we're seeing that very strongly with the GCF, that 10, 15 years after these funds started delivering, we're still trying to correct some of the mistakes that were made and dealing with the consequences. And I don't try to be dramatic, but dealing with some of the consequences of a bad structure that doesn't deliver on the things that we actually want to deliver. So I would caution against just speed for the sake of speed. I think a good structure is just as important as a fund that can deliver. So try to resist a little bit the need for just speeding up ahead just for the sake of it and agreeing on whatever bad outcome just because you want the funds to start flowing. I think one of the very good lessons that you can learn from the Adaptation Fund is on resource mobilization. The Adaptation Fund has struggled a lot to mobilize resources, partly because it was set up to depend on a mechanism that didn't deliver. And I don't know if at the time, because I wasn't there was an actual expectation that this was ever going to deliver, which is the CDM proceeds. But we have seen that they didn't deliver. And the Adaptation Fund has been maintained small and deeply underfunded because of this mistake in the structure. And we made the same mistake again, because now the Adaptation Fund is supposed to start depending, as it transitions to the Paris Agreement fully, on the share of proceeds of Article 6.4. And obviously, it's hard to predict the future. No one really has that kind of power, but I don't know anyone that is optimistic about the amount of funds that the share of proceeds of Article 6.4 will deliver, and that it will be anywhere near enough what is necessary for a fund like the Adaptation Fund to be able to truly deliver on what is expected from adaptation. So, when you think about resource mobilization, and I know there is a lot of talk now about innovative sources and the fund serving as one of those, the fund for responding to loss and damage being one of those potential channels to channel these, I think you need to be very realistic about what the actual expectations can be placed on those innovative sources. Again, because if the structure is not set up right and we are over-optimistic about what can be delivered through these innovative sources, we will see the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage in the same position that the Adaptation Fund is right now, in which we're still depending on resource mobilization from contributions from largely developed countries, even though obviously it's not limited. Voluntary contributions are possible. And we have seen that funds like the Adaptation Fund, which is, first of all, governed largely by developing countries. The majority of the board is from developed countries and focused on grants, is not the priority of developed countries. And that's a reality that we need to accept, And the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage will be exactly the same thing. Let's not make no mistakes. It will never be prioritized if it is a fund that is largely grant-based and has a strong governance where developing countries can make decisions. Because, at the end of the day, ODA and climate finance are policy tools for developed countries. And if they cannot control where that money is going and what it's doing, then they won't prioritize the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. I think it is important, though, maybe to think about what, for example, and this is kind of a snap reaction to what it means. What we heard just yesterday from the International Court of Justice is it's an advisory opinion, but it has made very clear that reparations is one of the things that is definitely, out there now in the legal space, and whether the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage and the discussions that you are having in that space can be one of the mechanisms for, as Claire mentioned, making those reparations effective is one of the things. But I think you need to really think about the long term and the very hard realities of the resource mobilization and what the different sources, including innovative sources, can actually be expected to do in the future. I think another thing that we can learn from the Adaptation Fund, especially because it's one of the funds that has been lauded as like the first fund to really look at enhanced direct access, etc. But also from the GCF, is that it's not enough to say that you care about direct access. It's not enough to say that you care about country-owned and country-driven approaches. This needs to be made into an operational reality, not only in high-level policy, but every operational decision you make will have an impact on that. And I'm saying this because even in the Adaptation Fund, where there's all of these long-standing tradition of direct access, we see the pressure that we are put through, not only us, but also the Secretariat, to shift towards international access entities or international accredited entities, or however you call them in the fund, because they can deliver faster. And we get stuck again in this need for speed and just push money out the door. And it is a fact that these international organizations have more experience, at least in pushing money out the windows, the door, not necessarily in better projects or more impact or more transparency, but definitely in pushing money out the door. And there will always be pressure to prefer these modalities, even if we keep saying that we don't prefer them, right? In the recent Adaptation Fund board meeting, there was a decision put forward to the board, which was rejected, to increase the amount of the percentage of the funds of the Adaptation Fund that can go through international executing entities. And it was rejected because we do actually believe in direct access, but it does reflect this idea that if everything you care about is speed, international entities will always have the priority, because we haven't had the time to build the capacities of national entities. And there is this pressure for speed, there is this pressure for disbursements, irrelevant of the impact that they may have, irrelevant of, the need to uphold that country ownership. And let's face it, we've seen it in all the funds. International entities like the UN and the MDBs don't actually care about country-owned and country-led. This is a reality, We need to accept that there is a balance of power in terms of capacities, in terms of access to high-level decision-making, to push focal points and NDAs to accept projects even when they don't want to accept them. And so it is antithetical to country-owned and country-led to give funding through large international access entities. I think the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage has a very good opportunity through this idea of direct budget support to actually bypass all of that. And I would really think that this is the right way to go about it, and not to open even the slightest possibility that international entities will be able to access this fund, because if they do, then the pressure will be there again to use them above national systems. We need to start building national systems that are capable of handling this funding. And this fund is the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage is a good opportunity for that. We cannot continue relying on international entities if we really want direct access, country-owned and country-led funding. So I think this is a good opportunity, and I encourage my developing country, especially colleagues, to keep pushing for this. Even though, of course, because also I am part of civil society in a way, I'm not only a board member, I really do want to see strong safeguards for this, because, there is a need. Some countries have excellent legal systems that can protect their people. Not all countries have it. And I think it is we need the FRLD to also establish clear safeguards for direct budget support to ensure that communities benefit and are not harmed by this funding through their own countries, sadly. So I did want to say that, but I do think that this is a great opportunity, because otherwise we will go back to what we see in the Adaptation Fund and the GCF, where international entities are prioritized again, over and over and over again. I also wanted to maybe touch briefly on the Secretariat. The Secretariat of the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage. It's good that you have an independent Secretariat. I think that's important. It also needs to be well-staffed and have enough capacity to deal with what's coming their way, because that's another problem we have with the existing funds. And, we hear a lot, for example, how the GCF is really slow. We don't hear this so much from the Adaptation Fund, but from the GCF, it's very slow. It takes a lot of time. It's so difficult. I can assure you that a large part of that is that it's a matter of Secretariat capacity. It's not necessary. You could streamline all of the processes you want, but if the Secretariat doesn't have the capacity to respond to a large amount of requests, they will delay the process. And a lot of the delays we have seen come from capacity in the Secretariat. And this is really important, that the Secretariat has all the capacities in terms of the amount of people they need, but also the right capacity. What we have seen in the AF and the GCF is that we tend to repeat certain patterns, like hire the same people, hire someone that worked in the World Bank or someone that worked here and there in the same institutions, and bring them into a new institution like the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, and they're just there to repeat what they know. It's not their fault. It's not a criticism of the people. But if you've worked 20 years in the World Bank, you're going to come with this idea that this is how things should work. We need capacities to also reflect different realities, to include capacities to deal with communities, but really engage with communities, with indigenous peoples, with all of the vulnerable communities, away from the status quo, away from the way the business as usual of international organizations. We need new ways of thinking if this is actually going to be a fund that has new ways of working. And I wanted to just maybe finalize, because I think I've been speaking for a long time. With
next 2 minutes, please. Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, with a thing on complementarity and coherence, with what's a question that was shared with me, because this is going to be a pressure that you're going to feel as well a lot. We see it in the Adaptation Fund, we see it in the GCF, this idea of complementarity and coherence. I would recommend being very mindful of what that means. I mean, complementarity and coherence cannot mean the lowest common denominator just so that we can all work together, right? It doesn't mean weaker policies or relying on existing things that we know don't work. So we should be very mindful that complementarity and coherence is not used to push the same approaches that we know haven't worked in the past. And for example, one of the things is, for example, the use of co-financing requirements as complementary on the guise of complementarity and coherence and all of these kind of things. I think you should really be ready to resist the push for complementarity and coherence. I think complementarity and coherence is an important concept. And I think Simon mentioned it, it's a way in which the FRLD can work better with other institutions around the same ecosystem, but in a way that respects the mandate and the purpose and the objective of the Fund for Responding to Loss and Damage, and doesn't weaken that in order to make the fund fit into approaches that have failed in the past. So we need to learn from what has not worked for communities and for vulnerable countries, and push complementarity and coherence up, make everyone else better, not worse to feed into this idea of complementarity and coherence. So I'll stop here, but I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me to this panel.
Thank you so much, Britta. I think, as usual, so clear. I mean, you've talked us through the aspect of balancing both the scale, speed, and the structure of the fund, which is very, very necessary. And you've also highlighted very clearly that the opportunity for us with the Fund for Responding for Loss and Damage is to make sure that the direct access modalities is also balanced with approaches where we need to invest in the capacities of national focal points and not to create and put our efforts and trust again back in international entities that just does not care. They have a set system, they have set structures, and they have set procedures to follow, and it will be very hard for collectively for all of us to change them. So I think given that we have some sort of segue in terms of finding the middle path between balancing the speed and the structure of the fund. And after having this one round of panel discussion and keeping my tab on time as well, I just wanted to also check with the background team if we have any burning questions out of the Q&A sections, or if we have time to take some questions. I mean, if people want to raise their hand, we can allow them to ask them some questions, and if some of the panelists could also take that. So let me read. I mean, I can see there are around 5 questions which are open and yet to be answered. So we have questions from Uma Pal. Thanks, Uma. On the issue of allocating funding based on triggers, has been the possibility of missing that threshold and yet dealing with extensive loss and recovery cost. Any way around that? Okay, so I don't know, Claire or Britta, if you want to take that question for response. We also have another question for Ambassador Adao, raised on practical and strategic challenge of LDCs who are likely to meet difficult requirements for assessing and perhaps implementing. Is this an agenda being given attention by the board or discussed with Santiago Network and WASA International Mechanism? So, Ambassador Adao, this is for you to respond. Do you want to respond here, or do you just want to type your responses? I'll be flexible to use that time advantage and typing advantage.
Can you repeat the question for me?
So I think the question is on LDC's challenge of balancing, assessing, and perhaps implementing. This is, I think, largely related to the point that Britta also mentioned on building the capacity of national focal points, and this agenda being given attention in Santiago Network and Warsaw International Mechanisms.
Yeah, so thank you very much for the question. I think we can learn from our past experience, like it was also addressed by Berta, with regard to accreditation process and also capacity gaps during the project cycle when we access to fund from the Green Climate Fund. And you correctly say that if we are going to have a direct budget support, I think we need to have a capacity in place for our national contact point, focal points, and also authority which are facilitating the process to access the fund. And in terms of getting financial support and also technical support for this issue, it would be coming from Santiago Networks, OBNS organization, bodies, and networks. So that's some sort of role played by Santiago Network, because decision of COP and CMA was very clear for this entity, this institution. So I think you rightly say that we could have capacity building, but more focusing on financial management issues. That will be also really good, and also project program implementation stage, and also accountability issues. I think that's also really good to have some sort of trust building in place as well. Yeah, thank you very much, and back to you.
Thank you, Mr. Adao. I don't have I cannot see any burning question as of now. But if time allows, I have a follow-up question. And perhaps, this is something which, has also been mentioned in all of the speakers' remark. And possibly, Simon, if you can pick it up also, is you also mentioned, the innovative aspect of, coming up with the funds which have the local realities included into it. Just wanted to ask, what sort of criteria, during the last Barbados International Mechanism Implementation meeting, the criteria was, there has to be a project proposal that has to be submitted. Where does, it lands, especially the vulnerable communities, though does not have the capacities as of now, in terms of accessing the funds and making sure the transparency aspects are kept in mind while putting that criteria, on board? And how do we, manage the both realities? One, there is no capacity in vulnerable communities. And the second aspect is that, there is this criteria which has been put forward by the fund. So any responses, any, midway on that developed countries would like to, thought about and, focus on?
Yeah, thanks for the question, Nakul, and this is a very important one, and it touches really on that aspect you already mentioned before, between balancing speed and doing things the right way. So I think first of all we need to have in mind. So on one hand we have the BIM, which is the first step of the fund. It's a kickoff phase, a startup phase. And we cannot change things overnight with the BIM. So it's a pragmatic first step. We also would like to encourage within the BIM to elaborate criteria which enable communities to access the funds. But and the other thing is on the long term. So the governing instrument foresees small grants that support communities, indigenous people, and vulnerable groups and their livelihoods, and also things we cannot like deliver overnight with the BIM are still mandatory for us to deliver in the long term. So we do have to think about alternative modes of access. And they will be more important in the longer term operational policies to ensure equitability and inclusiveness. So for the BIM, and that was your questions, I would see let's keep things as pragmatic as possible, but let's work on that aspect so that over time, as you said, the fund gets in a position to exercise this role of being inclusive and empower and enable communities to access the funds. I'm not sure if we will 100% get there with the BIM yet, but this is certainly a thing the fund needs to do. And let me, since I can speak, let me just say one last thing, which came to my mind also listening to Berta and other speakers, that I think at the end, yes, you're right. We all mentioned a lot. We need to speed up, and speed is of essence, but it is also of essence to do things the right way. And we're tailoring here a fund, and we all agree on that, which is supposed to be different from other funds. And we're tailoring a fund which is different from the business model of the World Bank. So we are asking the World Bank to do things they have not done before. And we are firm on that. It's not needless to say, it's in the decision in Dubai. So given that, please bear in mind that this already is something which is innovative because it has not been there before. And this is also something, there's no blueprint for doing that. So speeding up things is one thing, and doing things the right way is the other thing. So we will have to balance that in the future as well. And it will take the time we need. Yeah. Thanks.
Thanks, Simon. Claire, you have your hand raised. Please respond.
Yes, thank you very much for that. So just on that point where other innovative ways of disbursing money is being explored, I think at some point there's a proposal on the table from the LDCs. You can correct me if I'm wrong, Ambassador Adao, that the idea of having a rapid disbursement window, although this still has to be discussed further at the board level, but I think that's what we're trying to also support, that having that window, because it's kind of a dedicated channel for very swift, low bureaucracy grant delivery, and it is triggered by impact-based triggers, with flexibility to respond to both the sudden and slow onset events. So we are trying to break also, or recognize the barriers for access for many of the developing countries, including LDCs, that there are certain situations and they are put in certain situations, and the lack of capacity to meet all the bureaucratic requirements to access a funding window in the fund for responding to loss and damage. That is where the rapid disbursement window comes in. So we have yet to see at the succeeding board meetings how discussions or decisions around this kind of proposal will unfurl, but there's that already being proposed at the table.
Thanks, Claire. I think useful thoughts in terms of rapid response window. And that's, I think, could be one of the possible ways to deal the situation between needs and the speed of delivery. Simon, do you want to quickly respond? And I'll also check with other panelists if they want to quickly add last thoughts before I summarize. Simon, over to you.
Yeah, I don't want to give a long response. I just acknowledge that this is on the table, and this is something we are open to discuss, and we are happy to move forward in that discussion. And again, emphasizing that we have to think pragmatic for the BIM, and we have to think for a long-term vision and how to sequence this. I actually also raised my hand to say thank you for having the opportunity to take part in this webinar, since I have to run to my next meeting, and wishing you fruitful discussions throughout the day. Thank you very much.
Simon. Thank you so much for taking time to join the discussion. So I think just one last chance for all the speakers to, I mean, if you have any burning thoughts or issues that you would want to table on this panel discussion, please do it now. We have just a couple of questions which are left in the Q&A section. If you can have a look at them, I'll not read them now. We are already 3 minutes over the time. So yeah, I think I don't see any burning questions and hands being raised by panelists or any other participants. So what I'll do is that I'll just quickly say thank you so much to all of you for taking out time. We know that the Fund for Loss and Damage and responding for loss and damage has been a very, very typical fight. This has been a fight which has been ongoing from last 30 years. I mean, needless to say, the last 4 or 5 years, COP27, COP26, and COP28, operationalization of fund, so on and so forth. But this demand of including and accepting that loss and damage is a vertical that is worth looking at it has been a very, very prolonged fight. And the fight to make sure that the fund for loss and damage, which is now, have some shape in terms of an intermediary fund, delivers to its promises and really stands up to the needs of the most vulnerable communities is still very challenging. We have heard the feedback from developed countries. We have heard the feedback from developing countries, from official negotiators, from civil society members. And we understand that the requirement to up the game, the requirement to build capacities, the requirement to meet urgency does not allow us to take any shortcuts. We will need to invest our time, energy, and effort. And with each and every step, we need to check and ask questions based on what is the final outcome that we want to achieve. And this is especially true on road to COP30 and beyond COP30. I'm sure this conversation will be carried over beyond the COP30. And we will have some meaningful discussions, as some of the panelists say, that the next board meeting is subject to happen before COP30 as well. So we are hopeful that some meaningful outcome based on issues related to need, to accessibility, to direct allocation of funds, to soft triggers, all of these will be covered in the next board meeting. And we'll keep you updated on the next iterations from the board meeting. And with that, again, with folded hands and with great gratitude to all of you for taking out time, we thank you again for taking us through this knowledgeable session, and we'll keep you posted. Thank you again to the co-organizers and all of the participants as well. We'll close the session for now. Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Thank you, Salma.
Bye.
Thank you, sir. Thank you so much.
Bye.
Bye.